Alright guys, Huke again today. Hope you're doing that and enjoying your day so far. One of the big questions going into the World Championship is what about the 4 teams that didn't make it? Are they going to blow up their rosters before champs, after champs? Certainly going into the Esports World Cup, you've got to think they're going to be thinking about it given the money that's on the line that tournament and the potential to, if you do well at the World Championship and the World Cup potentially, to actually keep your spot going into next year as well. But over the last few weeks, there hasn't really been much talk about what these rosters are going to do. Shotzzy, however, says that as far as he is aware, yes, there are rumours and murmurs behind the scenes as to what these teams are playing at. Which of these teams are going to make some serious decisions? Is it going to work out in their favour? Could they even leave it to after the World Championship to try and get involved in the World Championship Rostermania? Or do they have to do it right about now with the roster lock? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Which teams is Shotzzy talking about and which players might they potentially look at? Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Here's Kremp this weekend at Mid-Ohio racing. It was practice yesterday. He was, third in the practice P1 in his own category. So, Kremp continues to have a pretty good time over there. Now, moving on from that, we did complete the grid. Now, I'm not going to lie, the last couple of votes here on the grid, people didn't want to, I don't know, the votes weren't as clear cut, let's say, and, well, maybe it fell off a cliff a little bit. So, anyway, great mechanics, great game sense went to HyDra. Average mechanics, great game sense went to Kenny. Bad mechanics, great game sense went to accuracy. I think those 3 pretty fair and justified. Great mechanics, average game sense went to Snoopy. I know that there was lots of talk about Shotzzy in that category, but Snoopy just, I think, about got the nod based on what people were commenting. Cammy was average, which I think is probably about right. And then Priester got bad mechanics, average game sense, which I feel like is a bit unfair. But, probably nowadays, maybe that is true. But, I don't know, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because historically, you can certainly look at times where Kenny's mechanics were great, no doubt. But nowadays, this probably is about right. Then, of course, you get down to the bad game sense, which is always going to be challenging and controversial. Pred finds himself in great mechanics, bad game sense, which, I don't know, Again, this year, I think you can justify it, to be fair. Like, I think it's been pretty rough. I think, maybe a player like a Nero, like, no player in the league has bad game sense. Like, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, they all understand things. But compared to the top-level players, I think Snoopy possibly would have been in this category last year. This year, he's moved up a number. Maybe next year he can keep moving up a number. I don't know. And Pred, I think you can probably justify it on this specific game because he didn't really seem to know what was going on here in BO6 for the majority of the season. And then there wasn't really a good vote for average mechanics, bad game sense. So we put the Stallion in there, whether you think that's justified or not. But there was a bit of drama last night, of course, with the OpTic podcast coming through. We'll discuss the Rostermania side of the story in a second. But they also put together some discussion on what team in the era of the OpTic dynasty could be formed that can actually take them down, at least to compete against them. Now, to be fair, there was a team that did so, and, some teams that did so on occasion. Certainly in Advanced Warfare, this was true towards the end of the title. This was floating around yesterday as well, because this was the FaZe team. Enable, Zuma, Clayster, Attach. They won good couple of tournaments, and they beat OpTic pretty much every time they played them. Like, they were the only team ever in the history of the dynasty to just have their number for a good chunk of the end of that season. But they weren't always consistent enough, and OpTic would, be always in the finals. FaZe wouldn't necessarily be, and if FaZe weren't there, OpTic would beat them. And this is of the grand finals that they made with this team of 4. They made every single one, and they won 4 of the tournaments. I mean, obviously, crazy to think, right, that back then, these 2 teams shared 7 tournaments between them as these rosters, and that doesn't even, I think, include when OpTic at the start of the season had Nadeshot and won 2 or 3 tournaments with him before champs happened, and then Nadeshot, took his sabbatical, which turned into a retirement. But, this was the Advanced Warfare season. We're looking at 7 championships across these 2 specific rosters. There were 14 championships up for grabs that season. Earlier this year, Clay won champs on denial, right, with a Taj. So, yeah, wild season, right, to look back on, really. But, look, this team of 4, did, for a time, have the Dynasty's number. And they were, like, probably the best matchup that a Dynasty has ever really had in terms of, you know, Clayster versus Formal, Zuma versus Scump, it was pretty much. Like, they were both really, really good at that game. Enable versus Karma, and often Enable was, you know, playing better than Karma at times. And then kind of Attach v Crimsix was kind of the way that it went. And in the entire Dynasty period, there wasn't really another team that quite put it together quite like these guys did on FaZe consistently. But of course, because of that result, they took that team into Black Ops 3 and it just never really went the same way for them. They just frankly weren't good enough to compete on that specific game. And then for OpTic, they were still the dominant force, and it was occasionally teams like Luminosity Gaming with Octane, like, well, okay, it was Rise Nation, then it was Luminosity in due course going into the following year. And then of course there were times, you know, Envy at the end of the season a couple of times had OpTic's number, and then of course that changed at the end of the Infinite Warfare season when they played them in back-to-back grand finals, and we know the results of that. So there was talk about it, right? Like, what players could you put together to compete with the Dynasty back in the day? I think really putting together a selection of a few players that played back then, it'd be difficult to really come up with a roster that could do it, apart from looking at the actual teams that were formed that occasionally could. Karma says no team could do it. Don't know what you guys are talking about. And, you know, Parasite is atting aches and maybe says, well, somewhat disagree with that assessment. Scrappy then kind of seems to imply, don't know what you guys are talking about, like, put me in back then and it's going to be a different story. You know, I always kind of respect this about Scrap. Like, it's an interesting character, Scrap, because I think deep down he does have some respect for the players who came before him and, you know, the path that they built and all this. But fundamentally, Scrappy believes that, like, he's better than all those guys that were playing back then. And, like, I do respect that on some level as a competitor as well. So Scrap was saying, don't know what you're talking about, Karma. Ghosty says, Ernie says, you can't kill him, Damon. He already knows, doesn't need to be said out loud. Well, this is a baked lineup, says Dashy. So, yeah, Dashy, Scrap, Ghosty, and Karma all in a tweet thread. That's, yeah, there's some Zaza hitting the timeline right here, no doubt. Dashy makes it very clear. But the other thing I wanted to share from this OpTic podcast was about a minute or so where they talk about Rostermania right now, because certainly after Major 4 DreamHack, the 4 teams that didn't make champs, 2 of them already knew they weren't going to make it. Cloud9 and Rocker had a slim, but they had a chance. It didn't happen in the end, of course, for either of those 2 teams. Cloud9, it ended immediately, and Rocker gave it a good go. And I would say Rocker right now are probably the 8th best team in the league. Like, I think right now they're better than Ravens, but they obviously didn't do enough compared to Ravens at the start of the season to actually make it to champs. So, you know, maybe Rocker could justify sticking it out. I think the issue for Rocker is, if I'm going to make a change, I have no idea what I do, because you're not getting rid of Kenny. Estriel's probably, in the grand scheme of things, your best player outside of Kenny. Nero turned up massively, and Gio's also real talented. So, like, it's just, that Rocker team should have been better than they were, to be honest. And it's difficult to say what you do, because if you are going to make a change, it probably has to be a 2-man change, really. Because I'm not sure a 1-man move makes much sense for Rocker. But also, at times, they showed that they could actually be pretty good, and they gave it a good run. They gave it a chance, anyway, to make it to champs of the most recent tournament. So, I'll play these clips, because these are the 4 teams that didn't make it, and Shotzzy says that as far as he has heard, while it might not be public knowledge yet, conversations are being had about teams making changes going into the World Cup. Of course, the teams that made champs, they're not going to do anything yet. After champs, though, that, of course, becomes a very different question. But there is a roster lock, we think, and that might be affecting things too.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I've never seen that stunt, but are any teams looking to make moves for EWC? Not that I've heard of. Well, I mean, I know like low-key ones, but not like anyone, not that like people know in the public. But I'm sure you'll probably see it within like, honestly, you'll probably see it after champs. Probably not right now, to be honest. After champs, I think that's when. Actually, I don't even know how that roster shit works. Now that I'm thinking about it, isn't roster like?
But I think you can make like a few changes. It's just not like drastic. So like 1 or 2 people maybe. Just not like a squad wipe.
Do you know when the roster like is, Riley?
I think it already happened. Technically already happened, but you can still make changes.
So you could like finesse it type shit. Interesting.
Wait. What'd you say about Ben? What did you say? Why does Ben love that? Ben Janie's team lives for roster lock. Yeah, roster locks on Tuesday. So, like, bro, I swear to God, every time I've heard the word roster lock, Ben has been associated with that fucking. I swear to God, he's been associated with it. Is he part of the league? Is he the one doing the roster locks?
He might be.
I mean, these are the things that keep me up at night. Is like, why does Ben care about roster lock every fucking stage?
Ben JoeDeceives, man.
It's whatever, man.
Prime video drop. Oh yeah, we already saw that. That's actually cool that they're actually doing that.
K-Son's team.
Oh yeah, K-Son and Draco.
That's not K-Son's
This is
team.
my team. This is my team right here. Draco.
They're the Stallions now, brother.
So of those 4 teams, which teams do you expect to make a change going into the World Cup? The World Championship, of course, they will, I mean, likely. Didn't Nastie say that he's out in Cancun or Mexico or something? I don't know where he said he was. Or like Vegas, I don't know. Like, it seems like he's taking a little bit of time off, maybe fair enough. But they will have to think about something, right? All of these teams, certainly for the World Cup. And I think for the Falcons, like the Falcons are, to me, the one to really look at because they were 3-28 on the season. They made the roster changes they did. They got a bit better. I think they know that Exnid is a man that they want to keep. I don't see Pred going anywhere. But if you, I mean, look at all these numbers, right? Exnid had a 0.95 overall, which is respectable, to be fair. Like, overall, his Slayer rating and some other numbers weren't great. Like, it's not like Exnid was really in the Rookie of the Year conversation particularly. But he was pretty good. Given his role, he was pretty good. I think Pred did a very solid job since returning as well. But apart from that, it's been relatively ugly, right? I mean, Arstie's at a 0.86, Priest at a 0.85. You know, these are Wixel numbers. These are Roxas numbers. Not quite, but you know what I'm saying, right? These are Dahoo numbers. So, you know, it was a rough season for the Falcons. And you've got to think that they've got to try something, right? So, Shotzzy seems to think that, yeah, team changes, conversations are being had. As Mercury said, there is a roster lock. The roster lock, I think, passed 1 week before Major 4, technically. But last year, it didn't stop Ravens picking up beans and, you know, making some changes. So I don't expect it. I don't think you can squad wipe, but I don't expect it to be a massive deal. You also got to remember that for the World Cup, it won't be Minnesota Rocker, it'll be G2 Esports. It will be Cloud9 rather than Cloud9 New York. It'll be Gentlemates and it'll be Team Falcons, right? So it'll be different brandings, technically. So, you know, why not allow them to make a couple of roster changes, as far as I'm concerned. The thing is, if you do make changes, you can't really poach. You know, you would like to go maybe, let's say you're Rocker, you'd maybe like to go and get somebody, you know, from Ravens or something, right? Or from Boston, or I don't know, like one of those teams that maybe bloated up after the season. There could be some talent that you could potentially upgrade on, but you can't do that because they're playing champs. So your options are effectively challengers if you're going to make a change. So I think there's a good chance that Rocker just stick it out, to be fair. I think Cloud9, the other 3 teams, I think they've got to be super compromised. Like, Rocker might be somewhat compromised, but I think, I don't know, they are the one that I think is most likely to stick out of all 4 of these, because Cloud9 seemed mega compromised at the major. They turned up first round, got bopped. Sib was not happy at all, it didn't seem. And, I don't know, Sib, I think, wants out somehow, or maybe just wants more control. I don't know. They made the changes, Catstall came in, Spark came in, Mack went, and of course Attach went and is now retired. Did they get any better? No. They showed a bit of promise sometimes, but they had promise before as well. Could they bring Mack back? Maybe. But that's, I think, Cloud9's predicament, because they've already gone to challenges and picked up the players they wanted. And now what are your options? Gentlemates, surely Gataga will pull something here. I mean, you've got to think that Lin's actual French player, they might bring him back. That was my theory for some time. It is a World Cup after all. Technically, they might think about it. Someone like Cobra. You know, there's some other French options they could look at to form a reasonable team. They had a decent squad last year that did quite well at the World Cup as well. And then Falcons, I think, do remain the kind of key question, because, you know, they have the most money, they have the most resources, and they will want to, of all of these teams, probably do the best at the World Cup. That's the tournament they were probably looking for all year. And as I say, Exnid and Pred, they're not going to be going anywhere, but the AR duo has been struggling. But, you know, then again, what do? You go down to challenges, and who exactly do you sign? All the players that you might have liked to have now been signed, right? Dylan Rex is on Ravens, Mercules is on OpTic now. So, you know, it's not to say there aren't other talents down there, but I think Clayster will have to think long and hard about what they do. So of those 4 teams, I'm really not sure Which ones are going to make changes? I'd like to see all 4 of them make moves because it would be more entertaining. I don't think they will. I could see maybe 2 of those teams making changes for the World Cup. Maybe that's enough, maybe it's not. Intrigued to your perspective as always on all of this stuff in the comments below. Thought it was pretty funny as well, really, that Codley did this whole farewell to the rocker for the season. So, we'll see them at the World Cup, but, we've got the black and white filter on this. They had their moments, but it wasn't enough in the end after the valiant attempts they made at Major 4. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.